All right, so the last time we were at chapter 5.
Yes, sir. There was an assignment on the Order of Melchizedek. I've sent it to you since last
Okay.
week.
Yes, I saw it. So let's discuss that. What you found?
All right. So from what I can remember, is pretty much the same thing that you have already told us during class. The reason why they say that Jesus is a priest according to the order of Melchizedek is because Melchizedek, from his time or from his period of time, didn't have any lineage that they can trace him from, like finding his ascendants. He also at that time was a king. And so since he doesn't have a particular genealogy that we can find, and he was not from the tribe of Levite as well. He was both king and priest. Then now this is the reason why they say that Jesus Christ is a priest according to the order of Melchizedek, just to sum it up.
Yeah, that's right. And really, there besides what is written in Hebrews and Genesis, and I think maybe one or two other Psalms, there is really nothing else mentioned of this high priest or this king of Salem called Melchizedek. So the most information we really have of Melchizedek is actually in the book of Hebrews. All right.
Yes.
And it gives us basically enough that we can draw on in terms of making the link between Christ and Melchizedek. All right. So
yes,
sometimes depending on what school of thought you are, there are persons who make a very big deal out of Melchizedek in terms of the mystery surrounding him, but it's not really a mystery. I think whatever important information is needed about this Melchizedek's life is actually there. So it's not really, there's really no mystery, right? There's really no mystery surrounding who he is. And as we know, again, the whole idea of the comparison, the type that Melchizedek is a type of Christ, right? And he would have represented the threefold ministry of Christ. So basically, that is the essence of who Melchizedek represents. And so the writer gives that kind of analogy because the closest in terms of relating to the ministry of Christ is actually Melchizedek. No other person in the Bible would have fit that threefold ministry of Christ except Melchizedek, right? All of the other persons who are mentioned in the scriptures, were, hold on a minute.
Okay, sir.
Okay, yeah. So all of the persons who were mentioned in the Bible would have only represented one or even the most two of the ministries that Christ represented. So we had kings, we had priests, we had prophets, and you had persons who were represented to be either prophet or, well, you had prophet and priests. You had prophet, you had priests, you had king, but nobody but Melchizedek would have represented the threefold ministry of Christ.
Yes.
Right. So that is one of the most important factors about Melchizedek's life, that he represented the role or the ministries of prophet, priest, and king, as Jesus did. Right? So that in itself is an interesting point. So he is.
As you say that, it's like my mind is triggered, because if I am not wrong, I think I have known of one man in the Old Testament, not Melchizedek though, the threefold, if I'm not wrong.
Who else?
Well, that's what I'm trying to remember.
No, nobody else. Only Melchizedek.
Okay.
Only Melchizedek represented that threefold ministry of Christ. So that is why he's called a high priest unto the order of Melchizedek.
Yes, yes.
All right, because of those particular roles, right? Aaron could not represent it, because Aaron, the priesthood of Aaron was limited in terms of Aaron. Aaron, his lineage died out.
Yeah, and he was not a king though.
He was not a king. Yes. Right? So he said, when it says Jesus is a priest unto the order of Melchizedek, that his lineages are the position that he represents is an everlasting position, right?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe what comes to my mind is someone who was king, judge, and prophet. Perhaps that's what I was remembering.
So in the chapter, it says that Jesus is a true high priest, right? A true high priest. And in terms of what he did in this role as our high priest, there are a number of things that would be different in terms of what Jesus did as high priest compared to what the Levitical priesthood would represent. For instance, when the Levitical priesthood, in the high priest, offered sacrifices on behalf of the people, and the sacrifices were the sacrifices of animals, innocent animals. In the priesthood of Jesus, Jesus sacrificed himself. Right? Jesus did not sacrifice animals on behalf of man's sin to appease God. He sacrificed himself, right, in order to pay the price for sin. Or the idea is given is the word that we find in the Bible, the word called propitiation, right? The act of appeasement. So Jesus appeased God's wrath. Because one of the other ideas that comes out in the Bible over and over again is that sin must be paid for, right? Sin must be paid for. And God in his holiness cannot allow sin to go unchecked. So somebody has to pay the price for sin because of God's nature, God's holiness. And the only one who was found worthy to do that was the Son of God, right? So Jesus made himself a sacrifice so that the holiness of God could be appeased. And so he is a high priest unto the order of Melchizedek. He's a high priest forever. And we would see that statement coming up in Hebrews. Now notice how he begins the chapter. It says, for every high priest from among men is appointed by men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sin. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he's required as for the people to also for himself to offer sacrifices for sin. And no man takes his honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was. So in other words, he says here that the priesthood had certain kind of certain weaknesses in it. So it was not perfect and could not fulfill God's righteous requirement. One, the high priest had to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as the sins of the people. So in other words, he was as imperfect as the people whom he served, right? Before he could appeal to God on behalf of the sins of Israel, he had to first appeal to God on behalf of his own sins, right? Jesus didn't have to do that, right? Jesus didn't have to do that. Just a minute. Yeah, yes, Celine, I'm back.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, I mean, this is an very interesting text, and it kind of brings out the nature of God, the benevolent nature of God, in that he was not willing to leave us all by ourselves, but even and that's why you can understand when, like, Romans, when Romans says that while we were still sinners, Christ died. So in other words, it seems the suggestion is that in every step of the way, God has intervened on man's behalf, even when man doesn't deserve it. Right? From very early on, God has always been intervening in the affairs of man, trying to reconcile him to himself, even when we don't deserve it. That's why Romans says, for when we were yet without strength, when we were still sinners, Christ died for the ungodly.
Yes.
Right? So, that's an interesting concept. Let's go pick up a few other verses. Just a minute again. Hello, morning. How you do, ma'am? Mm-hmm. Yes, Solin. So all right, so that was verse 1 through 4. In from verse 5 and 6 is a quotation taken from Psalm, and that is Psalm 2, verse 7.
Okay, sir.
All right. Quotation from Psalm 2, verse 7. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, and the he here must be God, who said to him, Jesus, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. He also says in another place, you are a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. And that quotation is taken from the book of Psalm. I am trying to remember if this is the. I think there might be other quotations about Melchizedek, but this one I know. So about Melchizedek.
Genesis 14:18.
Genesis
14, verse 18.
Genesis. So the limited thing. Yeah, why I think that's so striking is that even though much is not said about Melchizedek, the person, the impact that he has on the Bible and on salvation and the New Testament in our understanding what salvation is remarkable. Just a few words is said about him, but he represents a whole lot. We're understanding God's scheme of salvation and the new covenant is concerned. 7 through 8 says, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard of his godly fear, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And here we talk about what? The compassion of Christ as our high priest, right? And, the idea that is given here is that Jesus was obedient in every way.
Yes.
Right? Jesus was obedient in every way possible. And as a matter of fact, it is also saying that he could not be our high priest if he was not obedient. Right? In order for him to be our high priest, he had to be obedient to the will of God. That was what made him our high priest. Okay?
Yes.
And again, one of the important lessons that will come from this is the importance of obedience in our relationship with God. Right? Our relationship with God is of naught if we are not obedient to God's will. Very, very interesting point. Right? We have to be obedient to God's will. If we are not willing to do that, then there's going to be a problem.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
And he was obedient in every way possible. And having been perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him, called by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say. Right? And that is very straightforward. Then let us jump down to verse 12.
For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principle of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food.
Mm-hmm. You understand the writer's contention here?
Yes.
Remember the audience that he's talking to, by the way.
Yes, sir. The Jewish Christians.
And he is talking to them on the basis that they had wanted to abandon their Christian vocation because of the persecution that they were going through. And so the writer is kind of chastising them for the position that they have taken. Why is it that you want to abandon this faith simply because you are going through persecution? Right?
All right, sir.
He chides them by saying that, you know, this by the time when you should be mature people in Christ, it's almost as if, boy, we have to treat you like babes. You should know better.
Yeah.
By this time, you should know that Christianity is not for the faint of heart. Right?
Yes, sir.
But for those who can endure. And so he has a real problem. He has a real problem with the attitude of these Christians. Right? He has a real problem between, you know, with how they are behaving, right?
Yes, sir.
And again, you know, if in terms of maturity, you know, when Christians are at a certain point in their lives, one expects that they become mature people, right? One expects that they would try as best as they can to ground themselves in Christ. The writer says here that this is not so, right? These Christians are behaving like children. And as far as he's concerned, it is unacceptable that they are behaving this way. They should know better. Says by this time, you should do what? You should be mature, right? You should know the road that you are walking on and not want to just simply give up because you are going through some stuff.
Yes.
So he has serious issues with how they are behaving. Read that verse for me again. Let us pick up some things from it.
For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food.
Well, I tell you, it's just, but you know what is interesting again, Solin?
Yes, sir.
We kind of behave the same way, you know.
I guess yes, we do.
Yeah, we kind of behave, and is interesting how in every era of Christianity it kind of remained the same thing. Is that the more things change, the more it remains the same. You know, the same. Yes, I mean, interestingly, can you imagine if the writer of Hebrews were writing to us today, that he'd probably be writing the very same thing?
Yes. Yes.
It really wouldn't change. It really wouldn't change. Right?
Yes, sir.
So, you know, he has that kind of issue with this set of people who, you know, should know better.
Yes.
Right? Read the next verse.
For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are full of age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil.
So you know, he's calling them to be mature, right? Be mature people, right? Don't, you know, don't function as if you don't know what the real deal is, right? Because you know, we have and the truth is, if we follow the whole idea of what Christianity is, at no point in time was it ever given to us that Christianity was supposed to be an easy thing, right?
Yes.
No, at no point in time was, you know, Christianity ever meant to be an easy walk in the park.
No.
As we would put it.
As
right?
a matter of fact, 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 2, 3, and 4 says that we are appointed to this. And when it says this, to suffering, to persecution.
Yes.
2 Timothy 3, verse 12 says the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. And that is the heart of Christianity, right? That is what, you know, whether or not we like it, that's just how the thing go, right? And we must be prepared. So, and interestingly, you know, as we study, he's going to make, he takes 2 chapters to deal with that kind of issue, you know. He begins in chapter 5 and he goes straight into chapter 6 with the same conversation. That, you know, the immaturity of these Christians is, you know, it leaves a lot to be desired, right? Leaves a lot to be desired, and you know, he's kind of telling them that, you know, you get hang on yourself, right? Yes. Get with the program, because this Christianity thing is not a bed of rose. Even though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God.
Yes.
Right? You know, and in chapter 6, he's going to say to them that you should be moving on to eating solid food, right? And here is it that now you are so immature in your outlook on life that you don't even understand that persecution is part of the life of a Christian. It's like you are babes in Christ, right? Yes. We need to come again and teach you.
Not only that, sir, they should know it's not only about persecution. They should know that Christianity is superior than Judaism.
That's right. And that is his contention. That is his contention. That is, how is it that you want to go back to a system where salvation is not even offered? Imperfect. Yes. Incomplete, and you are here now under a system of perfection through the sacrifice of Christ, and you are here playing as if God has done nothing on your behalf, and you can understand why he has the kind of issues that he has with these Christians. And no doubt, if you know, as I said, if you were writing to us in today's world, probably it would possibly be the same.
Yes.
Right? It would possibly be the same argument, because we don't really behave any different where our own relationship with God is concerned. All right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so finish reading chapter 5 and go on to chapter 6. And I think we have about 1 or 2 more classes left before we end for this term. I think Hebrew should be a 2-term course, I think.
Okay, but I think we have 2 left, since next week Wednesday we won't have no class.
Oh, you will have, yeah, we will have 2
more
weeks. A special lecture next week, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, no problem. No problem.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay.
Have a good day, sir.
Yeah, man, you too.
Yeah.